Well, hey everyone, thanks for joining us today. We want to give you a quick update on how things are going at the church financially. And so I asked Kevin if we could record a video. And we were going to do this in the service and maybe give a brief update, but I was just thinking, you know what? If we could have a little bit more time to unpack things and share with people, I feel like that would be more helpful. So I brought that up to Kevin and he agreed. So here we are. We want to give you an update on kind of where things are at in the church. And of course, it's a really unique time that we're in right now. Things look a lot different than what we expected at the beginning. Most of you probably know or have heard of a church or two that has closed its doors for good or is thinking about doing that. And obviously that is very concerning for us. We want to see God's kingdom advance all over the place. We don't want to see any churches close. We see ourselves as just one branch in God's kingdom of churches, and so we don't feel like we're competing with other churches as long as they're preaching the Bible. We feel like we're just maybe different branches that serve different groups of people. We're all kind of Sunday school classes in God's big church, so to speak, and so we don't compete with them. So we're sad when we see those things happen, and it is concerning what's happening in some churches. So we want to let you know where we're at in case you're hearing about those things, that you kind of understand, okay, here's where First Free is at financially. But I often say that the church industry is the one industry where it's considered a virtue to share trade secrets. And that's really the way we feel. We want all churches to excel and succeed and thrive. So it really does hurt us when we hear about churches that have to close their doors, and we hope more new ones will pop up in their place, and maybe we can even be a part of that in some ways. But we want to let you know how our finances are going, and we've seen some dips in our giving along the way. We've shared that with you already, and now we just want to give you a better overview of kind of where things are at today. But we are very thankful for God's provision for this church and for your faithful giving. I mean, we can't say it enough how much we appreciate that, the fact that we are not in the position where we could be at this point in the year, given everything that's happened in 2020, which has been really amazing. So Kevin, thanks for being here. Thanks for making the time.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad that we figured out a way that we can spend a little bit of time with those that are interested and dig into a little bit more detail than we would be able to in a service announcement or an email. So
exactly.
I'm looking forward to it.
It's a little weird because I've been having meetings at the church all morning, and we've crossed paths there, but then I had to come home so that we could do this kind of interview. If we did this video together at the church, we'd have to have masks on. So
our video would look like this.
Yeah, exactly. It's not quite as engaging. It's not as fun. So we just have to go to separate places and record differently, and that's fine. So every year we try to make predictions and projections for the following year. We have to build an annual budget based on that. Obviously, we try to be very careful with the finances throughout the year. We're not just going based on the budget, but we're tracking them throughout the year. So we made projections last year for 2020 of what we thought we could anticipate, and you were obviously heavily involved in that. How'd we do at predicting what would happen in 2020?
Yeah, well, Adam, I didn't realize that this was going to be my performance appraisal.
You came up with that question.
we did pretty poorly, actually. Both on the giving side and on the expenses side. In none of our projections did we have a 5-month shutdown and a global pandemic built in as one of the possible scenarios.
How did we not see that?
I really don't know. I think that we'll have to do better next year.
That's right. I'm already thinking of what the disaster could be next year. So,
yeah, I think 2020 has just shown us that no matter how your imagination is, there's always something coming around.
So true.
And, that as important as planning is, that it's even more important to just be able to be in a position to trust God to provide for our needs. And I think as we talk through what's happened over the first half of the year, that's going to become really clear that God has done exactly that, and that our congregation's been amazingly faithful in their giving and in their engagement. Even though giving looks different and engagement looks different, we've got the blessing of going to church with and being a part of God's family with some amazing, consistent, faithful people.
So true. So true. And a big part of planning is setting yourself up well so that when you have to be flexible and make adjustments, you can do them better. If everything is off the cuff, if you don't have your numbers figured out, if you don't have good plans in place, then when disaster strikes, you're totally unprepared to adapt to the new situation. But if you plan well and wisely, when changes happen, it's more of a deviation from the plan than having to suddenly come up with something totally different and totally new, at least if you've planned well. So with that in mind, what are some of the changes that we've made at the church that have allowed us to adapt to the new world that we live in right now and the changes that we've seen in finances?
Yeah, so one of the really interesting things actually comes from last year, when we established a set of quarterly meetings where we would sit down at the end of every quarter, every 3 months of the year, and we would just go through with every ministry area, line by line, how the spending went as opposed to what we had planned, and what the next period looked like in terms of what we think the spending would be and what the expenses would be. And that's been a great series of meetings. It has taken on new importance at the end of the first quarter and now at the end of the second quarter, as we've worked through these unexpected changes in our environment. And so I want to give credit to everyone who leads a ministry or is responsible for a part of our budget, because every one of them has been working really diligently to make sure that we're looking at every expense and making sure that it is aimed at ministry. And some of the changes have been to move from in-person expenses and things that we had planned that would now not be possible because of the COVID situation, to moving more expenses, more investment into areas like our online abilities to broadcast and connect with our congregation through video means.
Yeah, and I want to brag on our staff a little bit and on you, really. The work that you have done here, and then in collaboration with our directors and our pastors and all of our staff, and Heather Hicker, of course, as well, has really been phenomenal. I mean, the planning that's happened here, to think about what we just went through as a staff, and I don't think we've had a single instance of conflict or friction around finances or fighting over who gets what or what can happen or is this okay to cut. Those sorts of conversations have all just been really gracious and God honoring, and a lot of that is thanks to your leadership and the meetings that you've had with people, many of which I've been able to be a part of as well. And it is a really neat thing to see the shepherding that can happen through a budgeting meeting and how we're helping to guide our ministries and what they do by giving guidance and coaching on where money gets spent and where things get cut. And it's always a conversation. And I don't get the sense that there's any kind of animosity or friction around it, which, having worked on multiple church staffs, I am well aware of how you can have staff sometimes that really get a little dicey and protective about finances. But this year, man, it's been amazing to see our whole team respond to what could have been a really difficult situation. And I'll be honest with you, I really haven't given that a ton of thought until right now. As you're talking, I'm just realizing, wow, we have had a really wonderful team environment around the finances, and that has not always been the case at every church. So very thankful for that.
It is an amazing group of people that we have on staff. And as we talk over the next few minutes about some details, and it looks like there's a lot of work that's gone into it, I just want to make it clear that that you and I haven't done the majority of this work, that It really is Heather Hicker and Sue Close. It is the rest of the office team. It is every single one of the ministry leaders in all of the different ministry channels that are just really diligent about managing this part of doing ministry.
That's right. And there's other people involved in making it all possible too, because there's a lot of data collection that has to happen, data entry. There's a lot of processing of information. So you've got Michelle, you've got Tara, you've got Terry, you've got Shanna, you've got all these different people that have been
Heather. We got Heather, right?
And another, Heather 1. I'm not sure which one's 1.0 and which one's 2.0.
I refuse to designate.
That's a good point. We probably should not be engaged in doing that. But yeah, the Heathers. and so many other people that are helping to make it happen. So sorry for making the video longer, but I just think I agree that it's important to acknowledge the fact that this is a team effort, and a lot of work has gone into even what we're just going to share today, because it takes a lot to figure all these things out and plan wisely. So with that said, what we want to do right now for all of you that are watching this is give you a look at one of the charts that we use. We have a lot of different charts and things that we use to keep track of giving and expenses and different funds at the church. And we're not going to overload you with information necessarily, but we just want to show you one of our charts and kind of demonstrate how things are tracking throughout the year here at the church, just to give you a big picture perspective on where are we at right now with our giving at the church. So I'm going to let Kevin take it from there and explain kind of what this chart means.
Yeah, let me walk through this chart. What this shows is the percentage of giving compared to what we had budgeted at the beginning of the year for giving for each month. And you'll see that we have 7 months represented because we're at the end of July. And so with the possibility that we may get a little bit more giving on Thursday or Friday, the last 2 days in July, that one might change a little bit, but it's pretty much where it's going to be with all of the Sundays already done. What you see is that for January and February, the giving per month was very close to 100% of what we had budgeted. Now, it might help for me to say that at the beginning of the year, we go through an exercise where we say, this is the amount that we think will be given in the year. And then we calendarize it by looking at how people have given in past years in different months or different seasons of the year. And then we factor in things like months that have 4 Sundays versus 5 Sundays. That makes a difference. We do see some differences throughout the year in terms of how giving goes. And so I think it's easiest for us to just look at what the percentage of giving is by month compared to what we had thought we would get from a budget perspective. And so if we look at this, you'll see that January and February, very close. Then the second week of March, we had to shut down and go online because of the increasing threats from COVID. And we saw almost a 25% drop in giving opposed to budget in the month of March. And I'll just say that was a huge concern. We saw that very quickly. One of the actions that we took was to apply for and receive government payroll protection plan funds. We went through quite a bit of work to get that in place. We received the money in our bank, and then about midway through April, we saw one of the biggest weeks of giving that we've had in a couple of years. And you'll see that April this year stands out because it was well above even what we had budgeted in terms of giving. And it was the results of giving in April that helped us to make the decision to actually give the payroll protection plan funds back. And so we returned that money. We didn't spend a dollar of it. We said, thank you. We anticipated needing it with the March results, but now we see that the congregation is going to be sufficiently able to continue the ministry without the need for government grants.
Yeah, and let me just pause there for a minute to add that was the result, both accepting the funds and returning the funds was the result of an awful lot of research and consulting with other people and outside agencies to make sure that we were making a wise decision, and of course with our elders and our pastors. So there was a lot of thought and prayer and discussion that went into deciding, yes, we think it's appropriate and wise to apply for those funds, and we received them very quickly. We know a lot of organizations and businesses didn't, but we did. And then there was a lot of discussion and prayer also that went into, and research and talking with outside organizations to make sure, is this the right move to send it back? And I think it absolutely was the right move. So we did not use a dime of that money. It came into a separate bank account just for it, and every penny of it went back.
We took actions that we thought were necessary, and we're reminded of God's provision. So you can see that May and June were then in the kind of 77 and 84% levels against budget, and July a little bit better at 87%. In fact, if we look at what that first 6 months looks like and compare the sum of the first 6 months with budget, you'll see that we received 90.7% of what was budgeted and giving for the first 6 months. Now, given that we were video only for at least 3.5 of those 6 months, it really is remarkable. And it's a testimony to the faithfulness of God and the stewardship of our congregation. So giving was down almost 10% over the first 6 months. But obviously, if you're not meeting in person, either during the week or on Sundays, then that takes some of the expenses out as well. And so when we looked at the amount that was given and the amount that we spent in expenses, for the first 6 months, we ended up seeing that giving exceeded expenses by $3,700 during that first 6 months. And that means that we were, now that's less than a percent. It's less than a percent of our total expenses. And so I just find it really encouraging that the giving that we received in the first 6 months matched almost exactly what we needed to spend to continue the ministry at the church for the 6 months.
Yeah, God has provided through his people.
Yeah. Adam, I mentioned that every quarter we sit down and we go through and we make a forecast. We just finished that series of meetings. There were 10 or 12 meetings that we had. It involved a couple dozen people in different meetings to look at every line of expense and what we expect to spend in the remaining 6 months of the year. And through that process, the expense expectations came down over $167,000. And so because we've adjusted our ministries and we know that things are different than what we'd expected to spend, there was $167,000 of conversations around, well, you know what, we're not going to spend that this year. We can reduce the forecast by that amount.
Yeah, and I know there'll be people who are hearing that and wondering, okay, what types of things were actually cut, and some people may even be concerned. Are we cutting things that are going to have a decrease in the ministry effectiveness that we would normally have? So can you give us a little bit of an example of the types of things that have allowed us to project those kinds of savings for the future?
Yeah, I think a couple of the really significant ones, one is utilities. And so as we look at building use, we can expect that utilities are down about $10,000 in the first half of the year. And we expect that as long as we're meeting largely online and not seeing the every day of the week usage of the building that we had budgeted for, that we'll see that kind of a decrease. It really is examples like that that are what build up that $167,000, as opposed to, we'd really love to do this ministry, but we're going to cut it out. There were no examples of that I can think of.
Yeah, and the reality is, just so people are aware, we could sharpen the pencil a little bit more. There are some extra things that we've left in there because we think, okay, this would be helpful, this would be nice to have, but if it comes down to it, yeah, we have some levers still that we can pull to reduce spending more. And I think all that's just a part of responsible management, right? Of a business, of a church, whatever it is. You want to make sure that you're planning wisely for the future and have some margin if you need to handle whatever comes your way. So
let me say one more thing on that, because one of the areas that we have not touched at all, either in the first 6 months or in the forecast 6 months, is our staffing desires and our staff. And where a lot of churches and other organizations are facing difficult decisions about laying people off or furloughing them, we have not even opened that conversation because of the situation that we're in, the faithfulness of our congregation, and really God's blessing.
That is a great point. And then we should also add to that our missionaries. We haven't had a single conversation about should we reduce support for missionaries or anything like that. Not at all.
And And so through that process of reducing $167,000 for the forecast for the next 6 months, the next piece of the chart here shows what we tried to do to understand what does that imply for giving. We now have a forecast for how much the expenses are for the following 6 months. And if we receive just enough to break even from a giving perspective, that would come in at 84.7% of the budget. And that's that second green line that I've added to the chart there. And you can see that the first month of the second half, July, is coming in at about 87% of what we budgeted for July, which is above that 84.7%. And so we were able to calculate a break-even line for the remainder of the year. And as long as our giving continues above that 84% and our expenses track with the forecast, and as you said, we expect them to maybe track a little bit below the forecast because there are some things that are nice to have in that 6 months that we may or may not be able to use. I'll give you an example of that. Most of our forecast assumptions include being able to get back to church and have some activities in the fourth quarter. Now, if that happens, that's great. It's planned for, it's budgeted for. If it doesn't happen, then we'll see additional reductions in expenses. So that's where we are on the general fund, Adam. As I look at it, the first thing I want to do is say, I'm really pleased with 90% in the first 6 months. And that I feel like if you look at where the 84.7% line is for the remaining 6 months, it looks like the last 3 months have been about like that. And so I think that if people continue to give at the levels that they've been giving, and certainly some will give more, others will be unable to give, that we've seen the congregation giving at a level that meets the needs of the ministry in these weird and uncertain times.
Which is so wonderful, and we're very thankful for that. Now, one of the unique things about the church finance world that not everyone would be familiar with is that sometimes in churches you have separate funds for different things that do specific things. So we have different funds. We have an outreach fund. We have a benevolence fund. We have a building fund. And I want to say to people, you don't have to do it that way. Some churches do. Some churches don't. Ours does right now. You can really accomplish the exact same thing in some different ways. So historically, we have had different funds, and so we continue to operate that way. But you don't have to. There's nothing wrong. It's just a different way of accomplishing the same type of thing. So we have these different funds right now in the church: the outreach fund, the benevolence fund, the building fund. How are they doing right now? What are we projecting for the future for them?
Yeah. So I'll start with the outreach fund, and the outreach fund is where we care for and provide support for our missionaries and some mission organizations that we support. There are over 36 missionaries and mission organizations that we support on a monthly basis. And as you mentioned earlier in our conversation, we haven't even had a conversation about reducing that support. In fact, there have been a number of situations, and as you can imagine, this COVID situation is global, it's a pandemic, and it affects every region where we have missionaries serving. And so we have been able to give special support to a number of missionaries because the global situation has created a circumstance for them where they had special needs and really were in a tight spot. And so because the outreach fund is there and we have some forecast budgeted emergency funds, we've been able to reach out to those missionaries and provide additional support for crisis. The way that the money gets into the outreach fund is something that I'm not sure everybody understands. So certainly people can give directly to the outreach fund, and that happens on a monthly basis. Some people designate a small portion or some portion of their giving to the outreach fund to support missionaries. In addition, and actually 2/3 of the outreach fund comes directly from the general fund. So every month we transfer 5.25% of every dollar that's given to the general fund into the outreach fund to support those missionaries. And it really is a legacy that this church has of essentially giving programmatically, giving a fixed portion of everything that comes in for ministry outside the walls of our church and outside the circle of our immediate community. And I think it really is one of the great legacies of First Free.
It's great.
Kind of similar to that, and if you kind of draw the circle in a little bit and say, well, what about closer to home? We have a benevolence fund, and the benevolence fund is all direct donations. When we were meeting together and doing communion once a month, at the end of every one of those communion Sundays, we would take a special offering for benevolence. It's an interesting hallmark of our church and our church community that the benevolence giving has been steady and it's been strong this year, even in the midst of the crisis and the struggles. And even though we've had a shutdown of our normal Sunday services and the opportunity to take that special end of service offering once a month, the giving for the year is still right on track with what we had anticipated for benevolence. And I think that the people who give on a consistent basis recognize that that is a need, especially in a time of crisis. And so the real headline on benevolence is that the giving in benevolence has slightly exceeded the amount that we've given out and been able to help congregation members and community members who are in need. One of the things that we did early on in the crisis was to put a couple of buttons on our website. We put an I need help button and we put an I can help button. And I checked the data just today in anticipation of having this conversation. We had 3 times as many people click and fill out the I can help form than we did the I need help form. And so you mentioned that we would talk about benevolence. This is an area where our church stands ready to help both financially and with prayer and with other needs as we become aware of needs and issues in our congregation and in our community.
Yeah, and it's been really neat to see the feedback from people who've been helped, who've been touched by our church in some way, or who have gotten help with rent or different things because they were affected by the shutdown from the pandemic. And the church has been a huge blessing to a lot of people, more than most people would realize, because obviously we don't get out there and share when those situations happen, but it is important that you all know your church is helping people in the community, and those people are extremely thankful and grateful, and they let us know that in cards and emails and things like that.
Yeah. It's a necessary shame that we can't just put those on the website. But one of the things that we're committed to, in fact, you and I, even though we're responsible for the overall finances of the church and the policies and the practices, unless somebody offers with a card and a thank you note, we don't know who gets benevolence.
That's right.
That is handled by the deacons. That no staff members are involved in that decision. It is purely the deacons and their processes to make sure that the benevolence is going to legitimate needs that don't create unnecessary dependence, but that do lift people up in times of crisis.
Yeah, the only way I find out is when I get a card or an email that says, "Hey, thank you so much for helping me in this way," and I go, "Oh, that's great that our church was able to do that." But yeah, we're not aware of who is individually being helped, and so we have a great team of people that works on that, and it stays separate from us until they send a card.
Yeah. So we've got the general fund we talked about with the slides. We've got the outreach fund caring for missionaries, the benevolence fund caring for needs in the congregation and in the community. And then finally, we've got the building fund. And that's a pool of money that we've set aside. Again, we transfer a percentage of the general fund giving into that because we want to be good stewards of the facilities that we're blessed with. And So in the building fund this year, we have a number of smaller projects. You mentioned at one point in a sermon that the facilities team has been working diligently during this time when the building is not being used very much, taking advantage of that to paint, to upgrade some things, to put some columns in where there weren't columns. And I will just challenge you all, when you get back into the building, to find the new columns. That'll be your challenge for hunting and finding. But they really have tackled some things. I think I'm excited about the cleanup and the refreshing of the cry room. And we're working on a prayer room that is going to be a great place, a comfortable place for special kind of private prayer times. And all of that is getting done without having to put the tools and supplies away every Saturday night in order to get ready for Sunday. And so there are some things that have been a real advantage from a facility standpoint. So we've got a lot of small projects, and then we've got 3 really big projects that we talked about earlier in the year.
Yeah, and let me just say for people too, most of these projects that we're talking about that our facilities team is working on are not very expensive. Most of the cost is in the labor, which we want to pay our staff. We want them to continue working. We don't have as much other things for them to do, set up and clean up and those types of things without as much physical ministry happening on campus. So someone might be wondering, well, why are we in a time like this spending all this money to update the campus? Well, a few gallons of paint and a couple of supplies here and there, really, it's not a lot of money that's being spent. It's more the time and which we want to pay our staff anyway, and the convenience right now of not having to get in the way of ministry activities to be able to make these changes.
Yeah, that's a great point. In fact, just to highlight that, when we look at that building fund budget, the forecasted expenses are significantly below what we had budgeted for the year. And so we're able to do a lot of these special things outside of the 3 capital projects, which we'll probably talk about here in a minute, that we've been able to do a lot of things and still not spend the same amount that we had anticipated spending because the building use is down.
You mentioned the capital offering, and we've sent out some updates along the way of how the capital offering is going. I think our last one was a couple of weeks ago. Can you give us an update on where we're at today?
Yeah, so in addition to 90% of our budgeted giving for the general fund, the congregation has contributed $85,000 to those 3 capital projects. And to remind you, they were a desperate need for a roof that was leaking every time it rained, and sometimes when it didn't rain, which I don't understand. The auditorium sound system, which we had speakers failing pretty much on a monthly basis, and we're down to about half of the speakers being functional, and then and also an upgrade to the screens to go from an older format to the newer format, which will be much easier to see from inside the auditorium and allow us to really provide scripture and song lyrics and video elements in a much more effective way than we've been able to do up to this point. And then carpet throughout the auditorium and the main lobby in front of the auditorium. And so those 3 projects were approved in February at our annual meeting. The roof work has been completed and signed off, and so that's done. We've had a number of test rains since then, and like I shared with somebody the other day, do you know where it didn't rain? Inside of our church.
Yeah.
Which I'm very happy about.
Yes, finally, no more leaks.
The auditorium sound system and the screens are underway. The way that works is our partner that's doing that work, Paragon 360, has acquired all of the equipment and the components. They're doing the testing and the assembly on site for them. And then once we have the prep work done here, which is ongoing, then they'll bring it in, and within a week, they'll be able to install everything, test it, adjust it for our room so that it is optimized to the best sound quality and visual quality for our room. And I think you will all notice a difference when you're back. And then finally, the carpet, we have selected the carpet. We decided to go with a yellow and green paisley, which I think everybody's, no, that's not true.
It's your favorite color scheme.
It is. We actually went with some grays and some blacks that are very neutral, that will wear well. We are in the process of placing those orders and bidding out the installation job, and we expect that that'll be done in the next few weeks. And so it's exciting. It really, from a facility standpoint, and I've got a real an association, a friendship with the facilities guys who've been working really hard. They're all eager. We're all eager to get people back in this building so that you can see the things that have been done, because it's pretty cool.
Yeah, we had an appreciation lunch for our facilities team yesterday, which was great, and they are just such an encouragement. They're such an encouraging group of people that get the reason for why they do what they do and can connect it to the ministry, and I'm just so blessed by that team. They're really good.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be able to work with them a little bit on some of the things that they're doing. So that's what we're doing on the facilities.
So let's talk to everybody that's watching this right now that has made it this far. We're almost done. But before you leave, don't go anywhere yet, because I have another question I want to ask Kevin, which is, what can the people who are watching this right now do? How can they be involved? Is there any kind of response that we would like for them to take as a result of this update right here?
Yeah, I can always come up with some responses. Boy, the first one is just join us in prayers of thanksgiving. I've said it several times through this conversation, but God has just been faithful, and our congregation has been amazing in their stewardship. And we haven't gotten a lot more than we need. We've just gotten what we need. But that's an occasion of prayer of thanksgiving and giving glory to God. And so let's make sure that we're doing that. Let's make sure that this is an opportunity for us to recognize God's got this. He's taking care of us. He cares about the ministry that's happening at First Free, and we're all a part of it. And so thank God. I pray thanks for everybody who gives to the church as well. One way to give, and we've seen a lot of people do this. So if you're in the category where over the last few months you've switched your giving from a check or mailing something in, or even going online and doing a one-time thing, and you've switched that over to a recurring gift, that's really helpful. As we have talked about planning and forecasting, boy, we can see what the recurring gift expectations are for the next month or the next 6 months. And that's really helpful to know what's that baseline giving that we're going to have. And so if you're interested in that, here's your plug. Go to efree.org/give, and it's very straightforward to set up a recurring gift. Let me encourage you that if you've got your credit card hooked up to that, it's much better for you and for the church if you switch that over to a direct direct bank transfer. The fees on a bank transfer are 25 cents, no matter how big your gift is, whereas the fees on credit card are a percentage of your gift. And we've seen thousands of dollars of fees accumulate on credit cards where it would have been a few dozen dollars on the bank transfer. So that's another thing. That's a tip. It makes a difference how you give to how much of the gift gets to be used and applied for ministry. I think the third thing would be just keep giving and praying. We want to pray Thanksgiving, but we also want to pray that God would bless the ministry and God would continue to support it. I think the first half of the year is really in line with Philippians 4:19, where Paul says, God will meet all your needs according to his glorious riches. We don't have to worry about our riches. God has all of the riches that we need. And as long as we're pursuing him and doing his will, then he'll provide what he knows that we need. It may not be what we want. It may not be what we budgeted at the beginning of the year, but God will take care of us as long as we're doing his will. And I think the long series that we just finished on Joseph and Life Interrupted is a great example of how God's faithfulness continues even when what we planned or forecast turns out completely different. And
That's
so,
right.
And so that's how I think about that. I'd probably close, Adam, just by thinking about that Benevolence Fund.
Yeah.
And we've talked about it, touched upon it a couple of times, but if you know somebody, if you are in need, if this is a time when financially you personally are in need, or if you know somebody that is in a crisis, in a financial situation, we have resources and a desire to, we see that that's a part of what the church does, is to care for people in crisis. And so the best way to do that is have the person who's in need just contact the church office. We have some great people that work in the office, Tara and Terry, that know exactly how to connect those people with the benevolence process, and we may be able to help. We may be able to apply those gifts and resources in a way that will make a huge difference for people in a difficult time.
That's great. We really do want to help people. We have been able to help a lot of people, but we can help more, and we have a great process set up to do that. Sometimes we tell people, hey, call the church office, and we don't give the number. And I'll be honest, I don't have the number memorized to be able to give it all the time. I probably should commit that to memory, but here it is. It's 636-227-0125. 636-227-0125 if someone wants to get a hold of the church office. And I'll say along with that as well, our church, we call them receptionists, but maybe we should come up with a better name for that, because they do so many awesome things. They do benevolence intake. They handle a lot of our accounting data input and those types of things. So we really, really appreciate them. So one of the other things that I just wanted to share with people as we get ready to sign off here is some exciting stuff that a lot of people wouldn't know, which is a lot of people are checking out the church right now. So we have new people every week coming. You know, we have about 150 people a week who are attending physically in person. And we have 3 different venues that we're operating. We have one in the chapel, which has a little more of a traditional feel. We have the venue in the activity center, which it started out for teen families. Now it's just kind of, it's the worship service, but there are some activities that our families with elementary or middle school or high school kids will really have a lot of fun with. So it makes it a little more engaging, makes it worth coming out for if you're up for that. Obviously, it's all with social distancing and masks and everything. And then we have the kids venue, which has been really strong. Lots of families coming out with their kids. They each sit at their own table and have masks on. And we do fun things for the kids there. But I just want to let you know, those of you that aren't coming right now, there are actually new people coming every week and choosing to be a part of our church. And so I got to talk with several people this last Sunday who are just checking out the church. And you know what? Not all of them are very far along on their faith journey. Some of them are just exploring what it looks like to believe in God. And so we're getting to share what that means with them and explain our beliefs to them. So I think it's just helpful for you to know, and for this not just to be all about finances, but here's the reason why we do the finances. Here's the reason why we want to make sure that the ministry is effective and continues. It's because we want to reach people with the gospel, and we want them to grow and see what a difference Jesus can make in their lives. And the exciting thing is, even though you may not all get to see that right now, especially if you're watching from home, that is happening. And we are able to reach people as a church, even in the middle of this pandemic. So I think it's so important that you understand, as you give and as you support the ministry of the church, that those things really are happening. Well, Kevin, thanks so much for joining us today, sharing all that information. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. And thanks to the 4 people that made it through to the end of the video.
That's right. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you Sunday, either online or in person. Thanks.